Hey everyone, I'm Nick, and I'm back at it again with another stone lithograph. And so this time, we're going to be working on a CMYK stone lithograph. This is one of my favorite ways to actually make kind of full color lithographs, because I can just grain 4 stones, etch them all at the same time, because etching is not that fun for me, and it's not a very creative part of the process. And I could just print them back to back to back, and I don't know, it's a lot of fun. And so, you're all going to come along and see how I do this process. So, first up, I've got to grain some stones. And I know I could just use one stone and do a counter etch method in between, but I like to print mine back to back, and so I like to just grain 4 stones and then draw them and process them all at the same time, and that way there's not that much waiting period in between. And I'm going to go ahead and grain these 4 stones all to FFF or 400 grit, because that gives me a very fine dot pattern, and that allows me to get really delicate and light tones when I draw, because that's really going to be the key to this process. Just having some really super light tones and very delicate half toning, in all throughout the image, and that way it creates this kind of full color image effect. Now, once my 4 stones have been grained, the next thing I need to worry about is the registration. And registration should not be understated for this part. It kind of brings the whole thing together. And so what I'm going to do is kind of punch 4 sets of holes. And in retrospect, I should have used a thicker paper. I've done it with paper before, and I don't know why I chose copy paper this time. That was just asking for disaster. But thicker paper, or some metal strips, or even just kind of backing it to tape first and then punching through it all. But anyway, 4 sets of registration holes, and then I'm going to come back to my stones, and I'm going to go ahead and put my pins through them and tape them down to each of my stones. And I'm using packaging tape here because the adhesive weakens when it gets wet. And so usually it doesn't get wet enough during printing that it weakens the adhesive a ton, but when I'm trying to take it off the stone and I want to clean off my stone, washing it with water will help get rid of that adhesive. And it's cheaper than duct tape. And so here I just kind of put packing tape on it, and then I'm kind of cutting holes where the pins would be, that way the packing tape can lay flat and there's just kind of a void where the pins can stick through. Now, for my image, I could lie to you all and just say I'm good enough to do this by hand and by eye, but I'm not that great, and so I get a little bit of help from Photoshop to get the CMYK down. And so what I do is I go ahead and make a new document that's the size of the print that I want it to be, and I make sure that the color is set to CMYK color, and then I go ahead and create that document. I bring in my photo, and remember that your print's gonna reverse, and so take care to flip your image if it has text like mine does. And so you can go ahead and go to image, and then go ahead and image rotation and flip canvas horizontally, and that'll go ahead and mirror your image for you, and so it'll give me something better to draw off of. And then over on the right hand side, next to our layers tab, we can see the channels tab. Go ahead and click on that, and then it'll break down the color for you, and so you can start unchecking some of these boxes if you want to see what it would look like. And so I'm going to basically take all of these and print off a copy of them. So I'm going to print off a copy of the full color version, because that's going to be my reference that I trace onto my stones with. And then I'm going to go ahead and print off a copy of each of the individual color layers. And so it will only go black and white once you have only one of the CMYKs selected. And so print off one of those. And while I'm drawing on the stone, I'm going to reference these photos and try to match it with my drawing, because my litho pencil is black, but I'm printing in color. I'm not really drawing any sort of value scale, I'm drawing color intensity, which if you don't work with colored or colored pencils very often, it can be a bit tricky to get your head to wrap around for the first few times. And so that's why referencing these Photoshop kind of color separations really helps you out. And so I'm going to go ahead and punch some holes into that colored one that I printed off, use that as my reference, and then using the iron oxide transfer paper, I'm going to go ahead and trace on top of my image, just kind of putting down the key landmarks for the drawing. So, the contours of all the shapes, and all the important things, maybe boundaries of where I think kind of shadows is going to be, stuff like that, but mostly the important part. And so basically it'll be kind of like coloring in a coloring book. And I'm going to use the same reference drawing for all 4 of my stones. That way the registration is exactly the same, and I can kind of trace over my old pencil lines. So if I don't trace it perfectly, I can kind of trace what I know I traced last time. It does get tricky once you get onto the second and the third ones, because you don't know what you've traced and what you haven't traced yet. But the nice thing about the registration pins is you can just kind of put it back on and retrace some spots that you might have missed later. And so first up, here I am working on the yellow stone. And if this is your first time ever doing a CMYK kind of process, you really, I don't know, I mean I never really noticed how there's so much of every color into every single spot of an image. And so there's going to be yellow in places that you didn't even think that there would be yellow. Like the cap here, there's so much yellow in it, even though in my head the cap is just red. And so I don't know, it kind of, as you do a few of these, it opens up your eyes to kind of how mixed the colors in this world are. And when I choose subject matter for kind of doing CMYK processes, I really like to choose images that have a little bit of kind of like every color. That way the CMYK process really gets its full kind of value out of all of it. Because if I was just gonna do, you know, a mostly red or blue schemed image, then I might as well just do, you know, just layers of blue and reds. I wouldn't really need to do all four in the CMYK process. In this image, that's why I scattered all of these sharpies around. That way I can kind of get a full color range throughout the whole piece and not just kind of sticking to just one or two colors and just kind of having a color theme. And I'm not going to do too much scraping for this image except for a few lines and a few areas where some text is concerned. But I kind of like that general graininess that the kind of CMYK process that kind of produces. It gives it a sort of homemade type of feel to it that I like. Anyway, here I am moving on to the magenta layer. And I've kind of run out of talking points for about the artwork, and so I'm just going to kind of start rambling on now. I know this is everyone's favorite part of the video. It's kind of me rambling while you watch me draw in the background. I started this print like 3 weeks ago. It was actually intended to be the print I dropped like 2 weeks ago. This is when I was going to go down to Texas to see my friend Jacob Taylor Gibson's MFA show, which was pretty awesome by the way. But it didn't give me much time to produce a video. That's when I was originally going to drop the Octafold Canister video, but it wasn't quite ready and I wanted to make sure I had a few extras made before I dropped that video, and so I postponed it. And that's when I just dropped that video of me crushing some candy through the etching press. And so if you just want to have some mindless fun, go ahead and check that video out. And so I started this 3 weeks ago and I was trying to finish this CMYK lithograph. I don't know why I thought I could finish this in like 2 days, but I tried. And I started drawing the first one and I was like, man, this is really fun. And I don't know, sometimes you don't get to like stop and realize how much fun you're having, and so I didn't really want that to end. And so I was like, I'm gonna just take my time with this print and I want to slow down drawing and just enjoy it. And so I ended up just kind of doing just that, and I was like, I'll just finish this print when I get back from Texas. How was Texas, you ask me? Well, it was alright. Luckily for me, it wasn't too hot. It was raining the entire time I was there, and I got to really enjoy a lot of great food. What I didn't enjoy was driving like an hour to get in between everything. Anytime anyone suggested anything to eat, they're like, oh yeah, it's not that far. We proceed to go into the car and go on a like 40-minute drive, and they're like, yeah, 40 minutes in Texas is nothing. Oh, that sounds terrible. That's quite a long time. You could do a lot of things in 40 minutes. Like I could dig a hole that's like 24 inches wide and like 18 inches deep in that amount of time. And hey, look at that. We're done drawing the CMY layers. And so let's go ahead and process that with a little bit of rosin and talc. And I'm just gonna slap a good old overall like 10 drop etch over all of these. No big deal, make it easy. These stones are gonna have a long time to rest while I'm in Texas, so I'm not too worried about it. For the second etch, let's go ahead and remove out the old crown drawing with some mineral spirits. And once I clear it out, I'm gonna go ahead and rub in a very thin layer of asphaltum. And then I'm gonna go ahead and use some water and a blue towel to go ahead and rinse off the old gum Arabic and that little bit of asphaltum on it. And I'm gonna go ahead and try out this Hawthorne Stone Litho Dense Black that I bought. I haven't tried it out yet, so let's see how it is. And so far I like it. It's very nice and stiff, but also greasy. And so I think it's pretty good for rolling up here. I don't have to add any mag carb to it. It's already pretty stiff. And it held up pretty well during that second etch. So I'm going to go ahead and rosin and talc these drawings, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit everything with the 12 drop nitric overall etch, and then I'm going to let it rest. And I was only going to let it rest for like 2 hours, but then it got late and I was like, man, maybe I should just print in the morning instead of like 9 o'clock at night. And so I waited until the morning. In the meantime, I went ahead and stretched out my paper, and I like to do little prints like this because it gives me an excuse to use up all those tiny little scraps of paper that I've saved up over the years. We kind of had like a little scrap bin back at my last school, and I would just kind of dig through there and pull out anything that was like slightly usable. And so this is a perfect time for me to use up all those tiny scraps. And so I'm going to go ahead and run each of these pieces of paper through the etching press 2 times, enough to kind of kill all of that texture that was on the surface of that nice soft paper, and it's going to pre-stretch it so it doesn't stretch when it's going through the litho press. And once that's stretched, I'm going to go ahead and put on a piece of tape onto one side to reinforce these holes, and then I'm going to go ahead and punch a set of holes into each of these sheets of paper. And then it's finally time to start printing. So I'm going to start with the yellow layer first. I'm going to go ahead and remove out the old ink with some mineral spirits, and then rub up a fresh layer of asphaltum. And while that asphaltum has some time to dry, I'm going to go ahead and roll out my ink. For this one, I'm going to do a little mix of yellow ochre and cadmium yellow because I like my colors to be a little bit more muted rather than kind of bright pure colors. And once that's ready, I'm going to go ahead and wash off my old gum, and then it's time to start rolling up. And I mentioned it earlier, but it's kind of weird to see how kind of what we turned from value scale earlier turns into color intensity now. And so the darkest parts of the cap and the drawing turn into the brightest parts of yellow here. And so this is where my big mess up happened. I let the paper that's holding the pins in place get wet, and the registration just kind of slipped. One of the pins just moved far away from where it should have been. And so to fix this, I took a piece of tracing paper and I kind of traced out some key distinct objects that were in every print, and I went ahead and lined that up with the drawing on the stone. And so where those new holes on this piece of tracing paper landed is where the holes for my registration probably needed to be. Anyway, now that we're back on track, let's go ahead and see what this first layer looks like. And yeah, that's yellow, and it looks pretty weird, but that's just kind of how CMYK is. It's just gonna look weird until you get to about the 3rd and 4th layers. And so for my red layer, I'm using mostly Charbonnel Ruby Red with a little bit of Charbonnel Carmine to kind of give me a bit more of a muted, warm kind of red. And so we're going to drop the piece of paper that already has the yellow prints on it. And man, I love pen registration. It makes this so easy, except when I mess up, like right here. And so you can kind of see at the very bottom pen, there's a slight white gap, because I think I didn't perfectly get that yellow layer back in place, but I've got a plan for it later. Anyway, onto the blue layer. And I'm going to be using these Charbonnels, kind of a ocean blue and turquoise blue to kind of get like a nice warm light blue color, and a little bit of transparent base because sometimes I don't like how strong the blue is, just a little bit though. And I've tried it with some other blues like ultramarine and that graphic chemical process blue, but I found that they're a little bit too dark and they're a little bit kind of overpowering the rest of the image. And so I kind of like this little mix of light blues that I've got going on here. But of course, the ultimate test is to print it. And honestly, I think there's a little bit too much transparent base in this. I find that, the 7-Up can's a little bit too much on the yellow side. I want it a little bit darker. And so I went ahead and put a little bit more blue back into that ink, and it's a touch cooler, and I'm pretty happy with it. And at this point, I'm always tempted to just call it done there because it looks like a finished product, and I like how subtle the colors mix together, but the black layer is worth it. It makes it so much better. And I like to leave drawing the black layer for last because now I have my semi-finished print and I can use the black layer to kind of fix the problems that I had, like any small slight misregistrations. I can use the black layer to go ahead and cover that up, or if I want to emphasize one part of the image versus the other part of the image, or I just want to put in a lot more value scale or clean up some lines, I can save that for the black layer. These are things, small tweaks that I wouldn't have thought about while I was still drawing it, but now that I've kind of seen the image here, I can emphasize some parts for other parts. Anyway, this video's gone on long enough, so let's go ahead and see what it looks like with the black layer. I went ahead and used the Hawthorne's dense litho black, and I mixed in about maybe like 30 or 40% transparent base, so I wouldn't have it overpower the whole image. And there we go. It really fills out that value range a lot nicer and clean it up. So anyway, here it is in all of its glory, trimmed down to its final size and scanned in. And I managed to pull an edition of 20 of these. So if you want to get yourself a copy of this print, you can head over to my website at nickfontart.com, and I'm going to have them on sale for the next 2 weeks for 30 bucks. And then after that, it's going to go back up to its, usual price. And so that's it for this week's video. Leave a like if you enjoyed watching my process, and I guess I'll see you next week with another video. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do for next week's project. I usually have like 3 or 4 projects going on at once, but I just kind of finished them all up, and so I've got nothing left. Okay, see ya. Now, who's my favorite stone?